to follow. When you're starting out programming, it is recommended that when you name a variable, no matter what it is, that you actually specify the type of variable, just for your own knowledge, as a 3-letter code at the beginning of the variable name. Okay? So if I'm making an integer 5, then I would just tell myself that this is an integer by saying int, and then some description of what that is. Completely up to you. As you learn more, you'll stop using that. It gets cumbersome. It gets too long. Okay? But at the beginning, it's very, very useful to just tell yourself what particular things are. Now, the notation here is common across most programming languages. It's different than the actual names for things in Python. So an array D is really called a list in Python, but we still use ARR as the code because it's common across languages. This may be called text in GIS, but you'd always just call it str for string because it's the same thing. Double is another name for a decimal. And you could also see FLT. Okay, those are generally interchangeable. It's float. Okay, you ran into float in GIS. You tried to add a field. Okay, so float, double, decimal, all the same thing. It could even be DEC. Okay, but generally I usually reduce things down to double, and then integer is always int. So, for instance, if you typed print array D index 4, it would just return you in the console 5, because index 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the number 5. And you can actually type those directly into the Rhino console, and it will. There's two other concepts. Three other concepts. The first is a loop. Very, very useful, and you will almost always use these in every single Rhino script you run. That's because you get a list of geometry, all the contours in your model. You need to then loop over that list and iterate over each item. So you're looping through a list of data. So if you know how a list works, loops are not that difficult. There are 3 different ways in Python, generally, that you would write a loop. The first one, and if you don't remember this, it's okay. You'll encounter it in the primer. You'll also encounter it in the examples that we do in class. But Python has very, very simple syntax that's a heck of a lot better than Visual Basic. You can literally, if you have a list, you can literally say, for some variable in list. Okay? So, and then this variable would be given that value. Okay? And we'll see it in the example in a second. You could also, let's go over that. We could define, again, an array D, like we just did on the last page, of a list of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we could say, for some variable that you define, as I, in array D, print I. That would return you the values 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? It will iterate over them and literally print you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? That's because I equals the value in array D. So every time you go through it, I equals 1, then I equals 2, then I equals 3, then I equals 4, then I equals 5. Similarly, you could have contours. Could be your first contour, second contour, third contour. Does the z value equal 100? You could ask it that. And if it doesn't, you could skip it. Okay? Similarly, and in old Visual Basic terms, you could say for, again, a variable in a range of numbers from 0 to some total, and then step, which means how do you increment? If we go back to we go back to here. In Grasshopper, there's this is a series of numbers. It's a list that's generated by the series component. It has a starting value of 1 that I set it at. It has a step of 1, which is the increment. So 0 plus 1 equals 1, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And it goes up to a count of 3. The total count is the length of the list, which is 1, 2, 3. Okay? These inputs are the same exact thing as the loop we were just looking at. So for I in range range 1, 2, 3, step 1 would print out the same list.
Step 1, count 3.
So again, we see start, count, and step, the same as in the Grasshopper thing. So the starting value, the total, and the increment. So you could say for I in a range from 0 to 20, step 5, and that would give you 0, 4, 9, 14, etc. Okay? So it will increment however many the step is. Okay? And then the last type of loop statement is a while condition, which just means while something is true, do something. Okay? Now while is a dangerous one, because that can immediately throw you into infinity, because your condition might always be true. Okay? So that's the third type. There's a few notes for clarity on the right side. I, j, and k are standard index variables, or incrementers. So you can see we were incrementing by I over here. So I is a standard incrementer, so is j and k. They are used in that order. So when we have an array list, we normally say the first index is always variable I, the second is always variable j, and the third is always variable k. You could have more, but then those are the basic ones you always start with, and so when people read your scripts, they know that you're incrementing by some logical thing and just doing a standard loop. Okay? These can easily be compared to Cartesian coordinates x, y, and z, or surface coordinates u, v, and w. So a surface also has coordinates. U and v are similar to x and y in Cartesian space, and w is the north.